The following video is sponsored by Cotner Funeral Home. On the latest episode of This is Reynoldsburg, we talked about the impact African Americans had on the city of Reynoldsburg. Whether it was serving honorably in the Civil War or chasing the freedom they always sought to earn, African Americans had an overwhelming impact on Reynoldsburg and its citizens. One of the most impactful events in the city's history came in the form of the Underground Railroad. One of the greatest migrations in history began in the South and ended mostly on the frozen rivers and lakes of Ohio. Between this rough journey, African Americans often sought refuge in the cities of central Ohio. Reynoldsburg citizens were among those which helped the slaves reach the next stop on their way to freedom. We sat down with Mark Myers and Cornelia Parkinson of the Reynoldsburg-Truro Historical Society to have them explain the laws which made these times so complicated and help us better outline the journey African Americans took to get to freedom.
We're here today to talk about slavery and the Underground Railroad and to basically explain what that is. Basically, it deals with slaves feeling that they were having a very difficult time. Some plantation owners treated their slaves okay to good. Others abused the system and really broke up families, broke them up, that type of thing. And you can imagine why after a while they would want to escape that. So the Underground Railroad was in effect from about 1816 to 1860, roughly, just before the Civil War. And this was a means by which the slaves who escaped from the South could be taken up through Ohio to find freedom in Canada. It's the Underground Railroad, but it had very little to do with railroads. It was just a term which meant it was a series of secret routes up through the state to get up to Sandusky and then over to Canada. Although there were many places on the lake, not just Sandusky, but we'll talk about Sandusky especially. There was Toledo, Cleveland, different places. So that's basically what the Underground Railroad was. Now,
I need to explain that there were several categories having to do with slaves. First of all, there were the bounty hunters who captured slaves from their own country and brought them here or brought them wherever they were needed. Then there were the slave catchers who, when a slave escaped, had mastiffs, which were a big dog which weighed about 100 pounds, and they had pistols and whips and they had ropes in order to to bind the slaves and make them run behind the horses in order to get them back alive to the owner. Then we had the slave haulers, who were the people like Patterson and Livingston and the others who helped the slaves, helped runaway slaves get to freedom.
And it goes back to this Fugitive Slave Act, which you have to understand in order to understand the Underground Railroad. That said, Ohio being free, no slaves. But politicians and Congress had to appease both sides all the time, all through our history, to keep those that opposed slavery happy, keep those who wanted slaves, who owned slaves happy. So there was always kind of this compromise. So they said, all right, you can have a free state, but
Excuse me, are you talking about Ohio's Black Code?
Well, I think the Black Codes were maybe earlier. This is 1850.
Well, I'm talking about 1804 to 1807.
Right, that would be much earlier.
Yeah,
but
okay.
The Black Codes in general, what was that again? I did read that, but.
Well, there were several sections, but an act to regulate black and mulatto persons. No black or mulatto person shall be permitted to settle or reside in this state unless he or she produces a court certificate of freedom. Certificate to be attested to by said court's clerk and sealed by the clerk. And then the second one, you had to register, and no resident of this state shall hire blacks who lack their freedom certificate. In other words, a fine for that. Any person removing from this state or aiding removal of black persons illegally and convicted in court shall pay $1,000 fine. And $1,000 would buy at least 2 houses, maybe more than 2. and shall moreover be liable to the action of the party injured, who was supposed to be the master of the slaves. In 1805, the act was amended and made harsher. It said no black shall be permitted to be sworn or give evidence in any case where either party is a white. So blacks were put down just like this, and it was not fair.
Right. It continues
Typically not.
right through. These laws were constantly being passed. And then in 1850, the Fugitive Slave Act basically said the same thing. This was nationally for the whole country. Free state, no slaves. But if you get caught harboring a runaway slave, you can be put in prison. You can be fined up to $1,000. And
Your house could be set on fire because there were slaves in it.
right. I mean, anything almost was possible that could happen. If even you were asked to assist in catching a runaway slave and you refused, you could be put in jail. So all of these laws then were passed, and this continued to just aggravate people. And the sides were kind of broken up, and that's when this exodus started. Actually, it had started earlier, but all of these runaway slaves, they were trying to get up north.
It was the will to reach freedom which saw roughly 100,000 slaves using the Underground Railroad to get to northern states and, more importantly, Canada, and by guiding them along the trail of the Underground Railroad. Join us next week as we uncover who some of those people were, along with Mark and Connie. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook and check in for content uploaded weekly.